Welcome to the fifth conversation through a series of conversations on sustaining the craft of acting and the different ways in a circular way that happens. And so I'd like to introduce a person that I've been associated with for 20 years?
I think so.
20 years. Who is the publisher and founder of The Soul of the American Actor, which I want him to talk about later on, what inspired him to publish this paper, and he's done it without fail for 20 years. Because to me, it's steeped in the traditions of the American School of Acting, rooted in the traditions of the Russian school, and yet encompassing everything in a very circular way. He's also the author of a play, a one-man play called Let It Be Art, about Harold Clurman. Harold Clurman, from my perspective, and I'm sure from Ronald's as well, is our George Bernard Shaw and then some. He also is the author of a book called Acting Teachers in America, which is a retrospective of all the major acting teachers in America, and it's still doing pretty well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And his new book is called Create, which he'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And he also is going to talk about when he goes to various countries all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
He does a workshop called The Art of Transformation. And in that workshop, which we were just looking at, is Stanislavski's original list of methodology for physical actions. And I was first shown this list a long time ago by Bobby Lewis and then by Stella Adler. And it's an interesting list. But what's more interesting is that this tradition has been continued at a time when, to be really honest about it, a sense of craftsmanship is being disposed of everywhere, not just in the theater. So his name is Ronald Rand, and I really want to welcome him, and thank you for doing this.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so, what did inspire you? I mean, I know it was a different time when you started publishing and writing for
Mm-hmm.
the Soul of the American Actor.
Well, I started doing, performing when I was about 5.5, 6 years old.
Uh-huh.
And by the time I decided and knew I was going to study with Stella Adler, I was in Florida, and I had done about 350 children's theater shows at a professional children's theater company.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to study with Stella in New York and took all of her private classes. I was with her for 5.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time with Harold Clurman, and he was teaching then in New York. And then Grotowski came to New York, and I studied with him. So I was very fortunate. And but after I finished my study and graduated from NYU and continued doing a lot of off-Broadway shows and off-Broadway and regional plays, there came a point in time, and I had done probably hundreds, like we do, hundreds of TV shows and movies in New York to make a living as well.
Mm-hmm.
In 1998, I realized, after continuing to study with other master teachers like Bobby Lewis and Joseph Chaikin and many others, that we didn't have an organ, we didn't have a newspaper in the country that really examined and shared the craft, the artistic process of the theater, the actor, all the arts in this country, and that was a serious something really lacking.
Well, I remember you doing an article with my wonderful associate Pearl Lang.
Oh yes,
who
yeah.
I worked with for 35 years,
Wow.
And then as a young person,
Mm-hmm.
when the Playhouse was the place.
Yes.
She taught before Martha. Imagine having those two back to back. You could barely walk. And then you'd have Meisner. So you couldn't eat before. So not really.
Amazing.
It was amazing. It
Yeah.
was an amazing. Robert Williams taught speech. It was an amazing place.
Incredible.
And Matt Maddox taught jazz. So I just want to say that that's very true. That's one of the reasons I asked you here, is because Pearl, and we had never met, and then we started putting together a project during those awful days of Ron Protas.
Okay.
To create a master's circle of teachers. And I walked in, we had only spoke on the phone over all these years. I knew it was you. Her own inimitable. So I remember that, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's
I want you to
remarkable,
continue with it.
But I did interview Pearl for the newspaper, and she's also in my book Create as well.
Good.
I have an interview.
She should be.
She is there with Bill T. Jones and Catherine Dunham, a lot of fabulous people, choreographers and dancers, and so I knew that it was something really lacking. So I went to Al Hirschfeld. And I said, I'm thinking of creating this newspaper. I met him at Gracie Mansion, listening to music there, and I said, I'm thinking, and I would like to have some art in the paper, and I was wondering if I could use one of your drawings. And he said, you can use whatever you want. I like the idea of the paper. So that sounded promising. And then I went to Phoebe Brand and Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson and Julie Harris, and I said, I'm thinking of creating a newspaper. Would you be interested in my interviewing for the first issue?
Well, you can see this.
They all said yes.
Smile broadening with Eli.
Yes, exactly. So I thought, okay, this is possible, but how do I do that? So I had to go to a graphic designer who's been designing the paper and putting each issue together for the last 20 years. And lo and behold, I came up with a masthead. And
Doug Barron is his name.
Doug Barron, and we put it together, and I told him what I wanted, and that's how it began. And Al Hirschfeld also was interviewed in the first issue. But we talked mainly, instead of, what's your favorite color and what do you think about what's happening in the world, we talked about the craft and about the process and how to discover life on the stage and how it comes together and what makes it tick and why do it and things like that. And since then, I've done, now in my 20th year, over 1,500 interviews. And I thought that the only way I really keep it going is thanks to support from folks like you, acting teachers. But
we support it because it supports us. I mean, I've done 2 or 3 interviews, 1 article.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm in your book, so I mean, of course, we're going to support it because if you're a teacher who took the foundation of what you were given and yourself has developed a process, otherwise, why go on? It kills me when they say, well, I studied with a Adler teacher, or I studied with a Meisner teacher. There was one Adler teacher and there was one Meisner teacher, and they were Sanford Meisner and Stella Adler. And they were both absolutely in agreement about the principles of what they wanted to teach. But they were very different in their approach to it.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what I try to uncover and discover, because I've interviewed probably close to 75 acting teachers in the newspaper of all the different techniques, whether it's Joanna Merlin doing the Michael Chekhov technique, or it's, I have an article or an essay from Lola Cohen's book talking about Strasberg's method in this issue, and Tom Oppenheim talking about what he does, and you, of course, and I try to discuss and examine, as you put it, the approach, the different technique, and being an acting teacher, but I think of myself more as a guide, because as a performer and as an artist, because I also paint and draw, I look at the craft and the art as a living organism that has to be kept alive. But how do you do that? The only way to do that is you've got to have technique, and then you've got to have passion. And so and
the two are not separate.
No, they've got to go hand in hand. And so I just came back from Uruguay because I'm a Fulbright specialist. They choose 75 teachers once every 5 years, and I was chosen as a professor of acting to go. And I've been to Bosnia and Herzegovina to teach at the Academy of Dramatic Arts for 6 weeks, in the University of Malaya, and now in Uruguay. And what I've tried to bring them and also learn from them is a you might say a toolkit, just like we know everyone has to have one, because they're all jumping all over the place. But what Stanislavski's done with this method of physical actions chart that I use is it's 1 through 40. It's the tools that he devoted his life to after 40 plus years of experimentation.
So this book that I alluded to earlier by Mark Jacobs.
Yes.
I want to show you that it is she's already done a podcast. That was the person I said you did. And this is why. Yes. She did a full-blown listing of the entire process here and how it's applied to the basic text, the interpretive text, and the differences with Meisner.
Yeah.
Now, quite honestly, for me, Bobby Lewis was terrific once people had the basis of the work. Stella was an icon. She was the child of perhaps America's greatest actor. Not many people know that because he acted all these classical roles in Yiddish. But for me, what Meisner's concept was, he found what was to be done. And so in this place, we found how to do what's to be done. And so when I hear people in Tasmaguchi, Idaho, say, well, I teach Meisner, and then they pull out, I won't name any one of these books. And then I always, usually it happens here, and I said, well, were they in class with Meisner? Because we live in a patented society now, and it's so important to the theater, not just in America. 3 years ago, there were 2 so-called legitimate plays on Broadway. Now, we know that playwrights write for actors, just like composers write for musicians, right? Obviously, your identification with Harold and his truth that he gave us all was so strong that it wasn't a matter of wanting to write it. It was a matter of having to write it.
Yeah, I was surprised because I had no idea that I'd be spending the last 18 years touring around the world in my own show as Harold. But and in a lot of ways, I can't honestly say I wrote it. Harold sort of guided me to say what he wanted to say.
I'll bet.
So that's how the play came to be. I mean, he sort of came through me, and every time I bring Harold to life, because I don't play him or act him, I embody him, and it takes me 2.5 hours in the place I call the creation room. A lot of people call it a dressing room, but I don't. And I put on my makeup and I put on his clothing. And at a certain point in time, and I never know when, for want of a better phrase, he comes and he enters me. And when Harold leaves this creation room, he goes into his apartment and he does what he has to do. And then he goes off to the theater. And I have no control over it. I hope and pray that he sort of will say the lines that are in the play. But to him, it's not a play. To him, he's just there to talk to his students. So I have no idea what will happen.
Well, see, this is the thing when you come from that circle of craftsmanship at a certain time. Now, I precede you, but there was a woman studying here, I think it was in the mid-'70s, and her name was Lynn Neary. She later went on to host All Things Considered. And she was at a dinner party with Harold. And so we all know Harold was a rather social creature. And so she started talking about the specifics of this process. And he said, "Where are you hearing that?" You'll, cigar in hand.
Yeah.
Where are you hearing that? That's really good. That's very specific. So I think I would venture to say that 3/4 of today's young actors, they don't know who Harold Clurman is.
Well, that's why I continue to do the show.
But
and amazingly, by the time I'm finished and they met him, they want to read The Fervent Years and they want to learn all about the group theater, and that's what it's about. I mean, I've had some people burst into tears at the end of the show because they've never met anybody as passionate as him about the theater.
There wasn't anyone.
I was with him as a young person right out of high school at 17, and he would jump up on the table on chairs and scream at the top of his lungs and to make it clear.
Were you taking? He used to do this class at midnight.
No, I didn't do
for working actors.
No,
okay,
he taught at the 92nd Street Y.
Yeah,
and
that was where I encountered him.
Yeah,
and this is how honest he was, and I know you'll get this, and I'm only going to. He's, if you want to learn to act, you're in the wrong place. I'm not here to teach you to act. I'm here to remind you why you wanted to act. He said, if you want to learn really to act, Meisner's across town. Well, the irony of it was he was in another teacher's studio. And he had this unbrandished honesty. I've heard this about myself. You can be honest to a fault. But I think he recognized it wasn't a fault. Could you talk a little bit about what spurred you? Well, obviously writing the Acting Teachers in America book and doing all that. What was the photographer's name?
His name was Luigi Scorsia, and he did the photographs.
He was really good.
He was a good photographer. We ended up with a lot of good photos in the book, and it was amazing because I felt it was important not only to interview the teachers, which was amazingly valuable, and it's a record because unfortunately we've lost some of those teachers since then. But also, I asked each teacher if I could interview a student that they could actually talk about what they learned, so that they could say, "Yeah, I actually learned something from this teacher." So having people like Sidney Poitier talk about Lloyd Richards or Laura Linney talk about Michael Kahn, and it was just a boon. Gene Hackman talking about studying and things like that. But when they took the time to talk about the process and what it takes, I mean, there's gems just like what you shared in the book too.
Well, also what Joe Beth shared.
Yes. Oh, it was wonderful to get back what she said about you and what she learned.
You mean that I threw her out?
I don't remember her saying that, but maybe she did.
Well, there's a little... No, it's in the book.
It's in the book. Okay.
And she said he threw me out. And
must have had a good reason.
Well, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And she realized that the time to turn the corner for her had happened in terms of seriousness.
Right.
And she's a pretty astounding person. She directs. She's a wonderful actress.
Well, I ran into the same thing with Stella. I mean, being with her for 3 days a week and then taking her not only the acting classes, but script interpretation classes and also scene study and advanced scene study. I mean, Bill Paxton was my best friend, and we would work a lot. And I wrote scenes for Bill to do in class and monologues. And we worked on the Zoo Story together for about 8 months.
Really?
We sat out in Central Park day after day to feel it, no matter what the weather was like. And when we finally got up on stage, Bill was, of course, playing Jerry, and I played Peter. And Bill comes out, and he's, acting like Peter, and she just did the same thing that you just did to Joe Beth. Sit down. You have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah,
I don't want to see this. And then she proceeded to sit down on the bench next to me and became Jerry. And she said, "I've been to the zoo." And of course, I had to become Peter immediately. And I was. And she started saying all of Jerry's lines like she wanted to act. And she just walked around and said, "What's that street? And who are you? And I want that bench. And get off the bench now." And I just didn't, paid her no mind and stayed in as Peter. And finally she finished. She said, "Okay, see, he knows how to live here. That's all you have to do. Now you have no idea." She went back after Bill. But, and she knocked a lot of sense into him. And of course he went on to really do some very fine work.
Yeah, Bill Paxton was, I don't go to the theater. For me, it's like a dentist going to a ball game and all they see is teeth. Really. When I have free time, I go, I'm always chamber music or solo music. The ballet is my favorite because I can just get lost in it. And of course, wandering aimlessly through any museum.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that kind of...
Yeah.
But I do go if there's a responsible reason for me to be there, and often I find out there wasn't. But, it has more to do with a flaw in me than anything that, to some extent. But one thing that troubles me, and I'd like to hear what you think about this. Do you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, the Paula Vogel piece Indecent opened, Sweat opened, another play opened by a woman, and I can't remember what it was. There were like 5 of them. Directly after the Tony Awards, they didn't win, and they closed. Now, the interesting thing is, in regional theater and off-Broadway, because a lot of these plays, there are a lot of new plays, and mostly by women, like Annie Baker, which was the last play, Joe Beth, I guess this is what touched us on. And if we lose the playwright, then the theater has simply become a technological experience. And that's not. Once you remove what's human, you no longer have theater. And what's human and could only take place at that moment, in that place, at that time. And
it's true. I mean, I was a drama desk member, so that afforded me the privilege of going to approximately 300 to 400 plays a year for about 15 years. Now that I'm on the road, I'm not here in the city, so I see plays around the world, which is different. So I get a chance to see that kind of writing. But going to that many shows and getting to see the work off-Broadway or off-Broadway or on Broadway, it always reveals to me that there is that urge that will never stop, that the writers have to write, whether it's good or bad. And whether they get produced or not, on the mainstream or not, there's a world out there that's huge besides Broadway and New York City, because the work being done in the Alley or ACT or the Guthrie or Trinity Rep or the regional theaters around the country, Arena Stage, I mean, it's
valid work.
Very valid and very powerful.
Very powerful.
And the playwrights are writing good stuff and the directors are doing good work. So it just shows you. I mean, you can go to San Francisco, or you can go to,
Chicago.
Exactly, or even further out, like Omaha. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, I'm spending a lot of time in the South now, and so there is a very deep urge to keep writing. And but I've also discovered, being a teacher and teaching at a lot of schools across America, that a lot of playwrights are not being taught or skipped over. And there's a lapse in that. So you mentioned Clifford Odets, and they look at you. Even, I have to be honest, it's amazing that Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller, they will say, he wrote, what did he write? And you say, Death of a Salesman. Oh yeah, that's right. Did you read it? No, but I've heard about it.
Well, wait until you hear this. Now, this is, as you know, a difficult studio. And that's its reputation. It's for people who are serious.
Sure.
So I had about 2 people, and I only select a handful of people to work with. And Marlon Brando came up, and I saw those vacuum cleaner eyes. And I said, "You don't know who Marlon Brando is?" I mean, that's...
Well, they don't even know who Laurence Olivier is today. It's incredible.
Ronald.
Yeah.
I've had literature students from Brown, all kinds of schools in here. And I said, "Well, what do you think of Thomas Hardy?" They're getting this look.
They give you the look. Oh, my God.
How about Dostoevsky?
Yes.
It's tragic.
Well, it's a serious issue, but that's why I take the time to go to these schools. I was just at the Alabama School of Fine Arts for a week teaching the students. I'm going to India now to teach workshops at the Theater Olympics and perform there. But it's important for me personally to go there and to introduce them to these people, because how else will they hear these words? So I make sure that they get out their paper and their pencil and they write their names down. And then I give them a handout of 4 or 5 pages with plays that you have to know, playwrights you have to know, books you have to know, music you need to listen to.
Yeah, we do that
leave
here.
It to chance. But these people are not per se in the theater. They're, learning about it. They're not serious, but at least now they know a little bit more. And, when I was studying with Stella, at NYU, and Stella said, the only way...
Is that where you began with Stella?
Yeah, through NYU. And then I continued after NYU ended because I wanted to keep studying with her. And I knew that, I wasn't going to get, quote-unquote, an education at NYU. So I went into back of one of those classic books that has all the names of the greatest writers who ever lived and all the great works they ever wrote of every country of the world. Mm-hmm. It took me about 8 years, but I read every book. Read all of them. Because it was the only way I knew that I would learn who these writers were.
After I hand out a theater reading list, about 2 months later, I hand out an 11-page list. And I said, "How much of that would you say you've read?" And 5%, 10%. And I go, "Well, it's just basically a first-year college reading list." And they giggle. And so then about 8 months later, there was this lovely woman here. I said, how much of it have you read now? She said, "I've read all of it." That was the first time in 40-some-odd years I'd heard anything of the kind.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
I said, "All of it?" She said, "Well, yeah, I'm dyslexic, so I read all the time."
Well, that's the way to
That was pretty powerful.
It is. Well, it took it to heart, and it makes a difference. I mean, it just changes you as a human being, and it's so inspiring.
Right.
I mean, reading Harold Clurman, or reading Stella, or reading, I continue to return to these books.
Of course.
And they always finding things. I mean, whether it's Stanislavski or Michael Chekhov or Vakhtangov or Meyerhold, I mean, the ideas are as alive as when I read them.
They're universal.
They never stop. And
they're no less universal than Shakespeare.
Yes. Yeah.
And no less universal than, I'll take something that's not in the sphere. Well, it is, because of course I studied with her. Mm-hmm. But when Graham changed the world, it was because it was universal what she was doing. Mm-hmm. It wasn't based on anything that was idiosyncratic.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what I've tried to show. I mean, as I mentioned, I wrote this new book, Create. And
talk about that.
It has over 130 interviews with some of the most extraordinary people on the planet. Actors, dancers, directors, musicians, singers, mime artists, clowns, and portrait artists, choreographers, because we're all one family of creativity, and so it goes in depth. But I also have included 150 artworks, and I asked people like Stephen Lang to share a painting he did of Macbeth, and I asked Robert Wilson has a drawing in there, and Sir Derek Walcott has a watercolor painting he did, so that we can actually see a manifestation that's included in their way of creativity. But they also talk about their influences and how and what makes them create the art they did. Somebody like Elie Wiesel, I said to him, what was the first play you saw as a young person? And he said, I saw Peer Gynt. Mm-hmm. And I said, how do you decide that you're going to write a play and write a book? And he said, it's how it speaks to me, the way in which it has to be told. And his play, The 10th Man, is an amazing, deep, enriched play, but his books are amazing too. So I just felt it was also, I have a poet from New Zealand, Apriana Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
I have Patch Adams in the book. I have educators. Robert Brustein is in the book, and Catherine Dunham and people like that, because it just it extends what creativity is about. And then I spent time with Chaka Khan so that we could talk about music and her desire and passion to keep songs so alive and potent for the young people today. So I spend a lot of time still interviewing musicians. Tomorrow I'm going to be interviewing a young playwright who has a new play opening at Penn Asian Rep. So it's very, very important to continue sharing this process of creativity because it just is so stimulating to hear about and to read, and for people to delve into the process, because I just know that it's what makes the world a much more interesting place to be a part of. I'm going to be going to India to be part of the Theatre Olympics, and they've invited over 500 performers from about 30 countries, and I'm only one of 3 representatives from the U.S. To perform in it. But what is such an incredible thing is the explosion of the art form in so many different ways. And what the Theatre Olympics is about is that this creativity explosion must go on. It has to go on in these countries. And we see it because it's a direct influence of all those who've come before us.
Absolutely. You just said it right there. And that's a good place to end because...
Well, thank you.
I think that sums it up. We cannot lose what came before us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Once you throw away history's doomed to repeat itself.
It's true. It's true. And it's what Ossie Davis said to me is the only way we can see a vision is to, of course, stand on the shoulders of the giants who have come before us.
There you go.
And I believe it.
There you go. No matter what it is, and at this day and age, we can't have enough inspiration.
Sure.
Just surviving each day is not a small task.
Yes. Well, I thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, thank you, Ronald. Really, thank you. It was
truly
great.
A great pleasure.
Okay, thank you.